Is Rishi Sunak going to be forced by backbenchers, among them Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, to tilt his energy policy for England to onshore wind? We'll be hearing from Scotland, where cash grants persuaded local residents to embrace onshore turbines.
I think it was absolutely essential. It was the real sweetener, and it was what enabled people to buy in, to then enable to see the benefits.
Also tonight, trade, trade and more trade. The post-Brexit dream. But as the government heads off to ratify a deal with Australia, what's the reality? We'll talk to leading trade economists. And American football fans celebrated holding England to a 0-0 draw. Is this World Cup a game changer for the US team? Good evening. Boris Johnson and Liz Truss have come together to defy Rishi Sunak over the government's energy policy. They're backing an amendment to the Levelling Up Bill by former Chief Secretary of the Treasury, Simon Clarke, to overturn a planning clampdown on onshore wind turbines in England, which has been in place since 2015. The bill has already faced a Tory backbench rebellion over housing targets, and Simon Clarke, who was also the Levelling Up Secretary under Liz Truss, said his amendment had found support right across the Conservative Party. Now, if it's passed, this would put England in line with Scotland, where the government has backed onshore wind for the past 2 decades and says wind capacity has to double over the next 8 years to combat climate change. Here's our science correspondent, Kate Lamble.
A decade ago, community opposition to wind farms was growing, and watching tensions rise, more than 100 MPs, including 5 members of the current cabinet, wrote to the then Prime Minister David Cameron, asking him to tighten planning rules.
Do you need to go on with a planning system that gives such priority to wind farms rather than local opinion?
In 2015, the rules were changed. Unlike offshore wind, onshore farms in England would only be permitted in areas already identified as suitable in local plans, and the project had to be shown to have community backing.
What we saw happen was a significant decrease in submitted planning applications in England. Planning applications are really expensive, so it's like, why would developers risk that amount of money to put in an application that's likely to get refused? In the period 2016 to 2021, only 20 wind turbines in total have been approved.
Not 20 wind farms, 20 turbines. Wales and Scotland raced ahead. Today, however, the government's own figures show onshore wind is popular. Not as much as some other renewables, but 78% of people strongly support or support onshore wind developments, compared to 4% opposed. According to YouGov, that's a higher approval rating than beans on toast or the Beatles. But when the question is changed to whether people would be happy for an onshore wind farm to be built in their area, opinions change too. Support in all region falls to between a third and half of the population, and opposition grows. That's why those now proposing that the effective moratorium should be lifted argue that new onshore wind developments should still only happen where communities want them, although how that support would be demonstrated and how much opposition would be accepted isn't totally clear. Just over half of those who'd be unhappy with a local wind farm say they're concerned about the impact on plants and animals. Turbines can kill birds which directly fly into them and displace or disrupt nearby populations.
In a few sites in North America and some sites in mainland Europe, there have been very large numbers of birds killed, sort of tens, maybe even more than that, hundreds in some cases of birds killed each year. But these are quite historic sites. So when onshore wind started to appear in the UK, we've managed to avoid those sorts of very high numbers of birds being killed in the UK. There's no particular reason from a bird conservation point of view to maintain a moratorium, certainly in our experience.
For many, though, wind turbines will always loom large across a landscape. In 2008, a wind farm was proposed near Christine's home in Denny, near Falkirk.
The community was quite split on the whole idea, actually. There was a lot of people that were very precious about the environmental impact, mostly aesthetic impact. The visual impact of all these wind turbines that they thought were really ugly at the time.
To win over those unconvinced, companies agreed to pay into a community fund which residents could distribute.
I think at the time, and the climate at the time, I think it was absolutely essential. It was the real sweetener, and it was what enabled people to buy in, to then enable to see the benefits.
Those who welcome wind farms point to its green credentials, helping us towards our climate targets. Currently, though, England's planning rules don't just limit the industry's expansion.
Not many people are aware, but our existing onshore wind farms have 25-year planning consents, and most of the planning consents require that at the end of the 25 years, the wind farm is removed.
Totally new planning approval would be required to keep or replace turbines. Is there the possibility that if the moratorium isn't lifted, that not only will we not push towards net zero, we could lose some of the onshore wind capabilities we currently have?
Yeah, while we expect a lot of the existing wind farms to be able to be repowered, that's not a given.
Some sites just won't be suitable for the much larger machines now used. Many communities will always hold objections to wind farms. The current debate will decide whether more are given the choice.
Kate Lamble, I'm joined now by the former chairman of the National Trust, Sir Simon Jenkins, and the chief executive of the Renewable UK, Dan McGrail. Dan McGrail, first of all, thank you both very much for joining us. If England had continued to build onshore wind rather than have a moratorium over the last 7 years, can you measure the impact on bills?
Well, we know that by building renewable energy, and here now I'm talking about all types of renewable energy, if we hadn't have had that, it would have cost us about 30 billion more in gas that we'd have had to import in 2022 alone. So as well as the environmental benefits of building new wind farms, which were pulled out in your piece, there are two other really important reasons to build wind farms. One is to strengthen our energy security and reduce the amount of gas that we need to import. But also, as we're living through a price crisis, which is caused by that high price of gas driven by the Ukraine war, this is a real way to help drive down consumer bills. So households are struggling across the country, and this not only does that help households, but also helps businesses as well, and get the economy moving with lower prices of electricity, which is really important. So this is something which is in the benefit of the society at large.
Simon Jenkins, the benefit of society at large, we are in a cost of living crisis. There have always been giant structures in the landscape. This is just another set of giant structures.
Well, I mean, someone has to speak up for the beauty of the British landscape, and no one is at the moment. Yes, there's an energy crisis, there's a housing crisis. We don't build houses in Hyde Park because of it. There's a balance to be made between the beauty of the countryside, which I think people do value very much. They certainly value it if it's anywhere near them. And the question of how we best cope with climate change. I've seen these things in beautiful landscapes in Germany, in Spain, in Italy, and they are devastatingly intrusive. It's one thing to say you want more wind turbines, we can put them in the sea for that matter, but putting them in areas of outstanding natural beauty in the English countryside, which people deeply treasure, is a real mistake. And I think we've been making a mistake which we won't be able to go back on.
But the English countryside as is wasn't the same as the English countryside in the 17th century, the 18th century. You know, hedgerows weren't there. There has to be change, and presumably climate change speeds up the need for some kind of radical action.
In time, we will have other ways of coping with climate change, I know.
But we don't have time.
Well, we have a certain amount of time, but we have other places to put the wind turbines. We're talking about proportionality.
Well, let's talk about proportionality, because Dan McGrail, we've got an issue here where you've got loads of surveys which people say, in principle, we are very happy, 80% say we're very happy to wind turbines. But as you saw from Kate Lamble's film, when it's anywhere near their vicinity, they're much less keen. You know, in principle, it's a great idea, but people, as Simon Jenkins is saying here, don't want them on the doorstep.
Well, I think we see slightly different figures from that. I think they're a little out of date, and the polling that we've done this year shows that actually public support is increasing across the board in every constituency in the country, and people increasingly welcome renewable energy developments in their constituency. We see some great examples as well, by the way, like the Whiteley wind farm in Scotland, which is a public park, and tens of thousands of people go there every week to pass time, to walk their dogs, to spend time with their families. So, you know, these pieces of infrastructure could become part of the community. But I think, you know, to what Simon said there, you know, there's a change here which is important. That yes, the countryside, of course, is crucial, but we as an industry want to work with communities to make sure that we build these pieces of infrastructure sensitively in places where you know, they should be located.
But can I just ask you about that? Because at the moment, you know, the big question is, what is reasonable objection? At the moment, you know, it takes one person to object, but people do feel that once this is in place, if this amendment's passed, then the next thing will be that the planning restrictions will be much loosened and people will not actually legitimately be able to object. Well,
that's quite right what you've said there, Kirsty. I mean, at the moment, you really need unanimous support, and that is out of step with absolutely every other piece of infrastructure that we build in this country. And all we're seeing is that's brought in line.
But Simon Jenkins, we have to be at net zero by 2050. We're not going to get to net zero by 2050.
I can tell everyone to stop driving their cars, stop flying in a plane.
But what happens in Scotland? You go to Scotland, you know what it's like in Scotland. There are many wind farms.
And it looks pretty terrible, frankly. I find it terrible. Other people, frankly, being bribed not to find it terrible. I don't get any money for not wanting it. All I'm really saying is there's a lot of beautiful countryside here, which is better protected in many ways than much of the continent. And we're threatening that now for what will in fact be a marginal distinction in global warming. The renewables energy firms are making fortunes out of this.
When you say it'd be a marginal distinction, it won't be presumably a marginal distinction if we go to entirely renewables in the United Kingdom.
You don't get to entirely renewables.
Well, not entirely, but majority of renewables.
Well, it's where you put the turbines we're talking about. You can put them in the sea.
Which is more expensive than putting them on land. Which is
more expensive, but there we are. How much is the landscape worth? These people want to make fortunes, and they are making fortunes now out of onshore wind. And I really don't see why we should sacrifice the English countryside for what will be a relatively short-term gain in global warming and frankly, in energy prices.
Thank you both very much indeed.